Poor little Mender met her end, witnessed so much she could not comprehend. Claimed by the lake, she screamed to her god, struggled for air as she twisted and clawed. But all was in vain, and her cries went unheard. 'Twas a heartbreaking theater of the absurd.
What the hell was that?
I know, you're all excited to get to the Unavowed episode and see the series finally come to an end, but before I'm ready to do that, there are 2 Detour episodes I want to get out of my system first. The second one I'm quite excited to get to, while I was completely in the dark on this first one here. I didn't know anything about Kathy and Elieen when I started playing it the day before I started typing out this script that I'm reading to you now. The only line I remembered from the marketing was a mention of Twin Peaks as an inspiration, which is oddly fitting after recently finishing the 25th Ward, which includes its own Red Room homage. At worst, I figured this would be an amusing disaster like the Charnel House trilogy's tone-deaf self, but lo and behold, the game is actually quite good. Granted, to say it's great is a stretch, but it has a lot of promise for future titles from this team. Kathy and Elieen was the creation of Joel-Staff Hasto. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, a Swedish programmer and game designer who previously did a bit of work on the Magica series and Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, and recently did some work for A Way Out from the same studio as Brothers. He created this game under his Clifftop Game Studio as his first lead project, handling the writing, design, programming, visual effects, and a bit of sound design as well. Wadjet Eye's involvement came in the English dub, assuming the game wasn't originally made in English. It's hard for me to find that out. And it's the hard work of Dave Gilbert as VO director for the English dub, and a lot of familiar talent from Wadjet Eye's past that helps to make the game whole. I'll say right now that Abe Goldfarb is oddly absent, but there is a character in the game that shares his name and may be a very convoluted reference to him. After all, Hasto seems like a big fan of Wadjet Eye, taking a lot of inspiration from the Blackwell games. Arlie Siegel, who you may remember as Max Lau in Techno Babylon and the head of the Reaper cult in Charlight, returns as the titular Kathy and Elieen, making great use of her ability to snark, but surprising further with some very real feeling moments and emotional vulnerability. She's really coming to her own as an actress, as we'll see in full when we get to Unavowed. She's usually the standout of the cast, though I can't share her best scene without massive spoilers, sadly. So enjoy this snarky clip instead.
The movie is about a girl and a boy who hate each other at first, and then they fall in love for no reason at all. Oh, wait, that's every romantic comedy ever.
Shelley Smith-Shenroy acts as casting agent again, a regular job for her with Wadjet Eye, but also plays Kathy's roommate Elieen, an overly sincere Christian girl with a knack for research. I haven't seen her in a leading role since Gemini Rue, and I'm happy to report she's improved considerably since, or rather now has a role that plays more to her personal strengths. She's a great contrast to Seagal's more snarky but quiet, introspective performance, going for delightful enthusiasm and giving the two a fun dynamic that makes her a refreshing twist on the usual suave man, tough girl routine that we're used to from this sort of game. It's just a delight to see these two just talk, which makes the later acts all the stronger.
Yay! Oh, let's do it! I'm so excited. I can't wait to lie to people.
You know that's a sin, right?
Oh, I'm sure Jesus will make an exception this time. After all, he loves me.
There are a few newcomers in the cast that do some solid work as well, particularly Matthew Kahn as the Red Man and a reoccurring creepy voice that plays through TVs. Though plenty of the cast are all familiar names who do what they always do and do the best to their ability. The most recognizable out of all of them is definitely Frank Totoro, who's going to be another big name kind of vowed. Continuing his good work in smaller roles is Charles Wade, a snobby old businessman who still has a soft spot for his old army friends. Dave Gilbert also has two small roles, and of course one of them is some sort of strange monster. Just go ahead and put a pin in that for Unavowed, by the by. It's also worth giving some credit to the surprisingly small art and sound staff. This is Daniel H. Kobilar's only known game soundtrack, and I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly. But that said, his score is fantastic. One of the best atmospheric scores I've heard from a point-and-click title possibly ever. He has a heavy synth and light percussion focus, making a sort of sound that can be warm and comfortable one moment, but unsettling the next. That use of artifice in his music ends up creating a great soundtrack for the more horrific scenes later on.
How do you know that? Who told you?
You did. Every time you came here.
You're not making any sense, Jimmy. We've never met before.
I'm making perfect sense. Everyone says so. I'm the sharpest tool in the shed. All bets are off now, Missy. Better buckle up and enjoy the ride. Forget all the rules. No going from top to bottom. No checking off all the items on your list. Start by asking me about the young chronicler.
The game's few moments of genuine horror are mainly work because of what he's done with his soundtrack, though the sound design work in general is also surprisingly strong. Hasto and Hendrik Anderson handled that duty, creating some unsettling moments through some clever audio manipulation tricks. Those moments are very few, but when they happen, they instantly stick out. My opening clip for the episode being a great example of this. John Stevens' character sprites leave something to be desired, sadly. They're not bad by any means, but they come off as a bit too undetailed or cartoonish at moments, possibly because of body proportions. One of the first things I noticed was just how much focus he seemed to put on Kathy's butt for some reason. It reminded me of Ben Chandler's sprite art in Blackwell Deception, which had a similar problem, though it's not quite as bad here. Though when it is bad, it's more noticeable. Tove Bergquist fares better with his character portraits, though a few don't seem to fit in properly, particularly the very undetailed IT guy on day 2. Norris Cross, however, is a genuine talent, making some of the most beautiful background art I've ever seen in any sprite-based game. He has worked on Resonance background art in the past, along with a handful of other adventure projects, and uses his experience to make a mess of places that feel genuinely real and lived in. His designs for the late game areas are also a delight to stare at, filled with all sorts of macabre details, even though the rest of the art doesn't quite live up to its surreal hellish rooms. Now at this point I'm sure you're asking what this game is even about. I've clearly gone off my usual script structure here, focusing primarily on the production and people who worked on the game instead of the thematic meat, and there is a reason for that. Kathy Rain is a good game with a lot of promise for later releases for the talent involved, but it's lacking a bit when it comes to narrative. This is partly because the game instantly reminds you of many other things as you play it. Not just including Twin Peaks, but a few titles in the Blackwell series, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the Gabriel Knight series from Sierra, and even a bit of Fargo and Silent Hill, though the Fargo bit might have just been me. Even with a few strong moments scattered without, there's this constant feeling while playing that you could just be watching or playing something better this thing seems to be, or clearly is, taking inspiration from or directly referencing. It does end up cementing itself as something of its own at a certain point, but it takes a good deal of time to get there in its rather short runtime. The game takes place sometime in the 1990s, following the titular Kathy Rain as she reconnects with her family she was separated from years ago by her mother, though not under happy circumstances. Joseph Rain, Kathy's grandfather, has recently died, and Kathy discovers that he went through some sort of seriously traumatizing incident in 1981 that basically left him in a vegetative state, shortly after her mother moved her to the city. Wanting to get to the bottom of it, she starts exploring Conwell County and looks for clues on what he may have been doing, and she ends up uncovering a supernatural mystery that goes far deeper than anyone could have expected.
Joseph, you there? It's me, Cocky. It happened to me too. And I'm not going to tell any of those bastards. They got it all wrong. You're the only one I trust now. Just call me back as soon as you can.
The game starts fairly dull, which can be mostly attributed to sticking fairly close to the structure of the Blackwell legacy in the early acts. The heroine deals with the passing of a family member they barely knew. We get introduced to those close to them in a bit of the setting. Exposition is dumped as the mystery starts getting explored, and eventually the supernatural elements pop up and the game starts to pick up. It helps you get into Kathy's shoes, but she's not as interesting a character as Rosangela was at first glance, playing up a lot of familiar strong female character tropes common from male writers, before she really starts getting development and having her layers explored later on in the game. Things do pick up once we start getting a clearer picture of what's going on, though the exploration of the supernatural parts of the story brings up new issues. The horror bits of the game only managed to catch me off guard once or twice, and these were the moments where it still wasn't clear what was occurring. The last act is fun, but the mood and atmosphere starts to dissipate because you understand too much of the bigger picture and the horror is lost, not helped by the very simplistic symbolism being used to move the story. The game clearly wants you to think of it as a David Lynch sort of thing in many scenes, but while it captures a lot of his stylish trappings, including one good scare with an off-screen noise I shared at the beginning of the video, it doesn't come close to capturing his ability to highlight artifice or creating unsettling, indescribable moods. The larger mystery is interesting and engaging, but it doesn't really leave much impact because the last act devolves into a coming-of-age final test that doesn't really meet the standards of what was being built up earlier. There's also some issues with the investigation gameplay here, but not so much in that it fails at what it tries to do, but that it's very derivative. It functions just like Gabriel Knight in the Blackwell games that came before it, functional and making you feel like you're solving a mystery with proper event flags in place to prevent sequence breaking. However, it doesn't evolve the design in any significant way, and this game came out in 2016. It has a constant area backtracking for small item gets and minor puzzles, something both Unavowed and Francisco Gonzalez's Lamplight City both managed to fix or gauge with in a different way just 2 years later. It's serviceable, but nothing about how it plays sticks out enough from its contemporaries. This is a small nitpick, but it compounds the game's biggest problem, a lack of self-identity. So much of the game is spent trying to pay homage to other things, including a good few pop culture references, like the movie posters on Kathy's wall, that it doesn't feel like a proper work of its own until the final scenes. It starts out as Blackwell Legacy, but now with a punk girl that's vaguely like the hacker from The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, not helped by there actually being hacking puzzles in the game later on. Swerves into a much more simplistic version of Twin Peaks, as they stop in Silent Hill with a dash of Persona 4 level blunt shadow symbolism, and somehow manages to end on the same note as Gabriel Knight's Into the Father, the game that helped divine how this entire investigation formula works for the point-and-click genre. The relationship between Kathy and Elieen ends up becoming the heart of the game and helps feel like something genuine, and I really hope future games just decide to go there and make them gay because their chemistry is ridiculous, but it takes the majority of the game for that to produce a sprout. There are also a few creative decisions that could have probably been left out entirely, leaving a bad taste in one's mouth. The biker bar area starts out awfully, with an attempted rape scene I will not bother showing that adds absolutely nothing to the story or character development besides mirroring a later moment in the last act. Said later moment, however, is thematically about something else entirely besides the fear of masculine sexuality, so it just makes it feel even more out of place. There's also one detail in Kathy's backstory that ultimately amounts to nothing that feels tacked in, because it's a bad thing that happens to women and thus should be included for the sake of another trauma that Kathy has to move past. It's handled far better than I expected, but it adds so little to both Kathy's character and the game's story that it feels entirely unnecessary as well, and could be replaced with all sorts of other traumas, making it almost a red herring the way its importance is built up. Despite this though, these issues just stop Kathy Rain from being something great. It's not a lazy cash-in ripoff by any means, but a real work of passion. One that just needs to explore its core ideas with a bit more self-confidence in itself instead of borrowing so heavily from other material. All writing is built off the works of others, true, but you need to manage to make that writing feel like its own thing through a personal core, something Kathy and Elieen struggles with for the majority of the 4-hour playtime. Of course, you can also go the opposite direction and wear that homage on your sleeve, but it doesn't really do that either. Despite this, if you are a fan of point and clicks or just want a good entry-level game for the genre, this is well worth checking out. It's an enjoyable time, it doesn't overstay its welcome, and nothing about it is outright bad besides that awful biker bar scene. In fact, a lot of moments are quite engaging and surprisingly entertaining. Hopefully this means the team will just do better next time, and I plan to be around when that happens.
You're on the right path, Kathy. Follow your grandfather, and everything will work out in the end.